All right, this is older adulthood, physical and cognitive development. First, here's a poem written by Judith Viorst. She has written poems for every decade of her life. They're all very interesting, and really give a nice perspective on different areas, different decades of living. If you ever have a chance to read any of her material, I think you would enjoy it. So instead of old, let us consider older, or maybe oldish, or something, anything that isn't always dressed in sensible shoes and fading underwear, besides which 70 isn't old, 90 is old. And though 80 is probably old, we needn't decide that until we get there. In the meantime, let us consider drinking wine, making love, laughing hard, caring hard, and learning a new trick or two as part of our job description at 70. So obviously that is a reflection on the decade of being 70. As our medical field has really developed and advanced, people are living to be older and older, and the health of older adults has also dramatically improved with that as well. And so as a result, what we're thinking as being old is continually getting older and older. And also, as you get older, what you consider older is being older and older as well. So that's just an interesting perspective, I think, on aging. So we definitely have, stereotypes about aging, and that poem that we just read by Judith Viorst, I think, kind of addresses some of those. That even at 70, you can still laugh, have fun, care, and even have sex as well. So there are definitely stereotypes out there that exist for older adults, and it's really important to be able to address those. Just as with any type of stereotype, you can take one example and assume that's how it is for everybody. So, I mentioned in a previous presentation, my friend who's the oldest person I knew, who was 90 years old and drove like a maniac, fast in and out of traffic, cussing out the slow drivers. She was definitely not the stereotype of, an older driver. And so it really is wrong, just as, sexism, racism, ethnocentrism, ageism is just as wrong as well, and something that we need to really be aware of, and not only in our own selves, but in the world in general. Here's another, I just thought, kind of an interesting study. Do older adults smell? Leave it in 2000, leave it to researchers, discovered that this concentration of 2-noniol increased with age, which is interestingly also a key component in the smell of beer. So apparently the older you get, the more you smell like beer. In a more subjective study, participants smelled pads that were placed in the armpits of sleeping adults for 5 days. I know that sounds pretty gross. I would assume, had to pay those participants quite a bit of money to smell those. Interestingly, middle-aged men are smelled the worst, and middle-aged women smelled the best. So there is some evidence to suggest that our body's smell does change throughout our lifespan. But a lot of that really is subjective in terms of whether or not it smells good or bad. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, really, adults are living to be older and older. And so we can split it sort of into these four decades, I guess, of later life. The ages 60 to 90 really is a transition. Usually in this time frame, people begin to retire. And so they're moving from, this role in a career, having a job, and moving into the retirement phase. And some adults have a difficult time for this, others don't. Really, as we talked about earlier, if you're of the mindset that you work to live, retirement can be a very difficult thing for us, for people with that mindset. For those with the mindset that retirement or that work is a means to an end, depending on how well somebody is set up for retirement financially, this can be a good time for them to be able to do what they wanted to do, to explore. I have a friend who's retired, and he is just absolutely loving it, able to do everything that he was once doing, as a short amount of time as a hobby. He's now been able to expand and is just enjoying it very much. So, that decade usually is a transition. The middle-aged old, 70 to 79, as you get older, you start losing people in your cohort, your age group, to death, different diseases. Once you get, the older you get, obviously the more that you're going to lose around you. And so, this is where some significant illness and death can happen to close friends and family. And it can also, sadly, also be a time where contacts in the world socially start to decrease as well. Some communities are taking this into account by, having senior centers and doing those sorts of things to help keep older adults, socializing and interacting with other people. Old ages 80 to 89. I think a lot of people would disagree that this is still old. Most 85-year-olds are frail, but that doesn't mean dependent. And again, I've known plenty of people who are 85 that are still very independent and able to get around quite well. But usually somewhere within this decade, health does start to decline a little bit. Some dependency in terms of help may become necessary for some adults in this category. And then finally, the very old, ages 90 and older. If they've made it this long, they probably are pretty darn healthy. But there is going to be some health problems at some point. Not necessarily anything severe, but at the very least, something that is going to be challenging, as we know, like the flu. Can be very dangerous for older adults. So things like that. So some of the physical aspects of aging, obviously, there's a change in appearance, the muscles and bones. So we talked earlier about the skeleton starts to shrink and can become more frail. Muscles and mobility. Muscles start to weaken a little bit. And in terms of mobility, one of the biggest dangers for older adults is falling, because, they can break bones, and, their equilibrium can be off a little bit. And there are some things that can help that. For example, Tai Chi is pretty well established that it helps, not only with flexibility and cardiovascular health, but also helps with balance and mobility as well. Internal organs also start to change as well, decrease just a little bit. And again, this is really where one's level of physical health is going to be very important. As I've mentioned throughout the adult presentations, that the sooner you start in terms of taking care of your physical health, the longer that's going to last in your life, and definitely raise the quality of life for us when we do this. Sleep problems. A lot of times older adults have difficulty getting as much sleep as they need. The senses also start to decrease, and then the brain and nervous system also tend to slow down with things like reaction time, which is why at some point for a lot of older adults, they're no longer able to drive. because of those things. So that's some of the physical aspects. Some more physical aspects. Talked about health problems can also be problematic. The chronic are those that last for a long time. So if we look at things like Alzheimer's or diabetes, those sorts of things would be chronic. And then acute would be things like having a cold or the flu or something like that. Nutrition also is important to consider for older adults, but that kind of goes without saying because nutrition is important really at any stage of development. But again, important for older adults to still continue to consider. Now, on Blackboard, there's a brief video on the science of aging, so that you can look at your own time. There's a couple of theories out there. The first is the stochastic theories, where aging is a result of internal and external environments, things like free radicals that break down cells over time and cause the aging process. I think what is accepted a little bit more is this biological theory, where there's a limit to the number of times a cell can divide, and these are the telomeres. And I'll let that brief video explain it to you. So please watch that. And then finally, some of the cognitive changes in advanced age. Speed of cognition starts to slow down, and memory problems as well. There's a difference between memory problems and things like dementia. Having a poor memory as an older adult is certainly normal. I guess the key rule is when people aren't aware that they're forgetting, is where the problem comes in at. However, older adults have a lot of life experience, and so they have a lot of wisdom to share. A lot of times it's lost on us when we're adolescents and maybe even young adults, but at some point we appreciate the wisdom that has been passed on to us by our parents as well as our grandparents or great-grandparents if you were able to know them. So some of the cognitive decline, dementia, for example, Alzheimer's disease, is something that just affects their cognitive ability for memory, and eventually they regress because of their brain I don't know what the word is I'm looking for. Their brain is just getting worse and worse, it can be a very tragic thing for people who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. So some of the things to compensate for an aging mind: select fewer tasks to focus on. Just something to kind of help accommodate those cognitive changes. Perform those tasks more frequently. So just find a few hobbies and then focus on those. And then finally, as is the case with all throughout the lifespan, recognize what you do have and use that. There's no sense in wasting time over those things that we've lost or can't do anymore. So it's just time to accept it and make accommodations accordingly. So that's it for the cognitive changes and things that go on, and physical changes that go on in older adulthood. And the next presentation will cover more of the personality and social aspects.